Thank you for coming today to the talk Crisis in El Salvador, and welcome to this joint grand rounds of the Health Equity and Translational Social Science research theme and the Center for Social Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry and NPI Institute at UCLA. I also want to give a special thanks to our co-sponsors. It's the Doctors for Global Health, and specifically Linda Sharp. And they have a long, warm relationship with the community of Santa Marta, El Salvador, from where our two presenters today come. Their talk is entitled Crisis in El Salvador, a model of empowerment by rural youth organizers focusing on sustainable agricultural development, historical memory of the revolutionary struggle, and gang prevention. It's going to be in Spanish, and you can access simultaneous translation. And then I should switch to you, Emiliano, to present.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Emiliano. I am one of the two interpreters today. Hola, mucho gusto. Mi nombre es Emiliano y soy uno de dos intérpretes inglés-español hoy. And we are offering today's meeting bilingually. And so the interpretation feature has been turned on. This means that at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can select a globe icon, and from that globe icon, select your language of preference. This is if you have a preference in what language you want to hear all of today's content in. If you are fully bilingual, there's no need to choose a language. If you are connected by a phone or tablet, you won't see the globe. Instead, you'll see three dots at the bottom of your screen, and you'll want to select those three dots. Once you've selected, and from there, select interpretation. Once you've selected your language of preference, you will begin to hear all speakers in that language of preference. It doesn't matter what language they choose to speak. So that means that you will also be able to speak in your language of preference, and everyone will hear you in whatever their language of preference is. So you can speak naturally in your language of preference, and you will always hear everyone in your language of preference. I'm going to repeat these instructions in Spanish and just offer a few more guidelines to run smoothly with these channels. Entonces, compañeros, vamos a ofrecer esta reunión en forma bilingüe, español-inglés, y eso significa que van a usar una funcionalidad de Zoom, que son los canales de interpretación. Pueden escoger en la parte inferior de la pantalla un globo terráqueo y de ahí escoger su idioma de preferencia. Ya que escogen su idioma de preferencia, significa que podrán hablar en su idioma de preferencia y también escuchar todo el contenido de la reunión en ese idioma de preferencia. Si están conectados por tableta o por teléfono, van a tener que tocar la pantalla y escoger los tres puntos de más opciones en la parte inferior de la pantalla, siempre dentro de la aplicación de Zoom, y de ahí escoger interpretación.
And there you can select interpretation. If you're bilingual, it's not necessary, but if you have a preferred language, please select that language. And this means, again, that you'll be able to always speak in your preferred language, and people who have selected another preferred language will be able to listen in their preferred language. And we'd also like to ask that you're conscious that we're interpreting, and normally interpretation is behind 4 or 5 seconds behind what's being said. So this means that if you want to make a comment or give an opinion, please allow for a pause before entering the conversation so that interpreters can finish what they were saying. At the same time, if you ask for others to participate, please understand that it'll take a couple seconds extra for the message to get to them because we're interpreting. And we also want to ask that if you use acronyms, that you explain what they mean, what that acronym means first. Many times it's impossible to interpret acronyms. And I'm going to repeat these guidelines into English.
We want to ask everyone to be mindful that we're interpreting today. Typically, interpretation is about 4 or 5 seconds behind whatever the speaker is saying. And that means that if there's a conversation and there's back and forth, we ask that you provide a pause or you pause before responding to someone else's comments to allow the interpreters to catch up with you. Likewise, if you're asking for people to comment, please be aware that they're going to get that message a few seconds after you've said it. And something else that can be helpful is that oftentimes acronyms don't interpret well. So it's more helpful to actually say the full name of institutions or whatever the acronym may be so that it can be interpreted properly. Finally, another thing is that if there's a comment that's relevant to the chat, please read the comment out loud so that we can interpret it. Don't just read it silently and respond to the comment silently so that everyone can get the information in the chat as well. Finalmente, si hay un comentario en el chat que es
Finally, if there's a comment in the chat that's important for the conversation, please read the message out loud, not just in your head, because that way everyone can receive that information as well.
Ethel, you can also assign me as an interpreter. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, great. So it's a special pleasure finally to introduce our actual speaker, Elvis Martinez Nataren, known as Peter, and Maria Betty Jovel Rivera, known as Betty. They are both inspiring in organic to build very briefly, a bit more about the context of their work. Both of our presenters were born at the height of the in the large refugee camp of Mesa Grande, in a remote part of Honduras, where I conducted field work in the early 1980s. Their parents' home territory was in the crucible of one of the remote rural conflicts in the northern portion of the province of Cabañas in El Salvador, where I was simultaneously conducting field work since 1981, revolutionary violence, political organizing, and communities supporting the FMLN guerrilla fighting. In 1987, several thousand refugees, including our two speakers, who were little children then, resettled the territory from which they had been displaced while the Civil War was still raging, still in process. They built it back up from the ground of the scorched earth territory destroyed by the Salvadoran military troops. These resettled refugees founded what is today the vibrant village of farmers, small farmers, called Santa Marta. In other words, the presenters grew up literally under fire, subject to deadly political repression, because the military dictatorship of El Salvador was not forced to sign a peace treaty until January 1982, which would have been 5 years after the refounding of the community of Marta. And El Salvador, as many of you know, has one of the highest murder rates in the world, if not the highest, and its formerly LA-based gangs have gone global in El Salvador, much of Central America. They interface with public sector and private sector organized crime and petty racketeering. These gangs have even taken root in remote rural communities, such as the hamlets and the regional market towns surrounding Santa Marta. Faced with this long-term challenge, both of our speakers have been part of the youth movement of their community ever since I met them back in 2014 when Peter interviewed me for their newspaper and popular radio station. Peter is the vice president of the Santa Marta Cooperative and is on the board of directors of Doctors for Global Health. He's a rural youth educator and political organizer. Maria Betty Jovel Rivera is a specialist in administrative systems for hydroponic and organoponic agriculture, and also software. Both Peter and Betty are here physically, but logistically, as you know, you're all remote. I appreciate you for being here. Welcome. And logistically, Peter will be presenting the entire talk that they've both prepared together about their models of political organizing and sustainable development. And Betty will participate with them in the question and answer period. And finally, last sentence, I hope here in Los Angeles, we can learn from the successes they have achieved in preventing the expansion of gangs and promoting public health, personal safety, and sustainable development. Thank you very much, Peter and Betty. And Peter, you're starting. So we're just going to upload his PowerPoint onto the screen. I think this. Yes. Okay. Is it visible? Okay. Oh yeah, you can. Great. Okay, your turn now, Peter.
Let me just plug these in and see you, or maybe use this.
Okay. Oh, okay. So should we just disconnect it, the audio?
No, you're good.
No, but she said she wanted us to
Oh,
get
the
rid.
headphones?
Yeah.
I'm trying to find where to put it.
Okay, just a second. We're just gonna.
You have headphones? Donde-
Para los audífonos.
It should be on the
The
computer.
headphones.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
A test?
Hola, hola. Sí, escucha en los audífonos.
All right, I'm using headphones.
¿Listos?
Ready?
Bueno, muchas gracias a
Thank you very much
todas las personas que están conectadas.
to all those who are connected, and thank you for this invitation.
Nos avisan si
Please let us know
si estamos hablando muy rápido.
if we are speaking very quickly
La traducción.
for the translation.
Bueno, ya la presentación de
So,
nosotros, gracias
our presentation,
por
thank you, Felipe, for explaining from where we come, our
para
roots.
nosotros es un gusto ahora
For us, it's a pleasure
con ustedes
to be sharing
nuestro trabajo principalmente en El Salvador.
our work, which principally occurs in El Salvador in the community of Santa Marta.
Estamos listos.
All right, we're ready. So our country, for those who haven't visited, we're a small country. We only have a size of 21,000 square kilometers, smaller than many of the United States' states. Right now, we're 6 million inhabitants, and there are over 3 million inhabitants, Salvadorans that live in the United States and Europe. 51% of us are youth. It's a relatively youthful population. We have more than 3 million that of our population that are women. So that's the reality of our country. It's a very small country. It's overpopulated. It's quite overpopulated, and that generates what things that we're going to discuss: marginalization, systemic inequality that Salvador has continued to develop over the last 30 years. And we're from Santa Marta.
It's on this slide still. Show presenter view. Oh.
Yes, that.
Bueno, tenemos un poquito de problemas
All
técnicos.
right, we had some technical difficulties. As I was saying, we are from Santa Marta. And maybe Betty can help me explain Santa Marta. Santa Marta was founded in 1987 on October 10th from people who were refugees of the war. They were returning in that year, and among many other communities, Santa Marta was founded. Santa Marta is distinct in its organization. There's a women's union that participates in different processes of the community's development. It has a lot of youth studying in universities, and the community has a high school. This differentiates it in that its youth don't have to go to other places to study, but its youth do move on for university. And with many youth in the university, we also have a group that runs a nursery for plants. And this youth group is really about skill building and activities that help keep youth out of other activities. And this is a strategy that differentiates Santa Marta from other communities. Yes, we currently have over 3,000 inhabitants, according to the health ministry. We have a lot of rural development compared to El Salvador's other counties. Our political structure is called cantones, which might translate to counties. And we are within the department or the state, which is the poorest of El Salvador's. It's the 14th department or state with a very high percentage of illiteracy. There's a lot of delay in social development in this region of the country. So there's a lot of collective activity, and it's maybe one of the victories or benefits of the war. The community fought and organized itself. And it can be compared to other areas of El Salvador where lands are privatized. It can be very hard to find employment and get ahead. And Santa Marta primarily produces corn and beans, and there are 25 organized groups of youth, of women, and this is perhaps what's most important and what most helps Santa Marta. And it's a model for base building and organizing. So we have 29 years of experience in this nursery for plants. And it's how we've survived the war, the violence, and economic property. Another issue is that people die young. So in Santa Marta is one of the only spaces which is important in terms of youth because they've been able to survive now for over 19 years despite the violence and the social and political problems that El Salvador has. So we have a hydroponics and organic cultivation program, and we have trained people and involved youth from our community and other countries. There are young people from the United States who have come and learned about our project. Structural violence in El Salvador has a long story. It's not just what is going on now and what we see in the news internationally. I imagine that you've heard that El Salvador right now, it has an official war against gangs. That's what we see in the news in Germany, in all of Europe, in South America. Governments in South America, for example, saying that they're going to implement a war against gangs in the same fashion that El Salvador is. The Dominican Republic president said yesterday that they're going to implement that in the Dominican Republic. So this crisis that's occurring in El Salvador has a long history. We had a massacre of indigenous groups in 1932 where over 30 million indigenous persons were killed just for demanding their rights. And we entered a period of military dictatorships and are still dealing with the scars of that massacre of indigenous peoples. Then there was a tragedy of military dictatorships. A dictatorship was inserted in the country that culminated in 12 years of civil war. And those who defended the people in the country uh, were people from the countryside. And finally, a peace agreement was achieved, and the United States was involved in that peace agreement. But issues around economic inequality and social problems were not addressed in that peace agreement. And so we see the beginning of the development of gangs develop in the 90s, developed by refugees from the war who had gone to the United States and then were deported, specifically from the Los Angeles area. But extreme poverty and especially stretched by neoliberal policy has meant that, for example, the government has not invested in education, has not invested in the youth that were born during the Civil War. Instead, what we've inherited is trauma. And so we didn't see those investments from the PAN government, from the Arena government. The tragedy of the war has meant that violence has grown, and there hasn't been a psychological response or a response to help develop the country and the people. And so we had the initial developments of gangs, and now this generation has radicalized itself to the point where we have gangs that are completely distinct from the gangs that you might be familiar with here in the United States. Organized crime gained power over these groups, and it's been very hard for the government to combat them. And maybe that's where we can start to think about how the structural violence of the state have formed the younger generations of the country. In terms of our national census, we are 51% comprised of youth. And we are seeing that The youth, as I was previously commented in Santa Marta, is characterized by youth studying in universities. And that means that there's a big difference in comparison to people who have other types of information in terms of the communities. And so here in our photos, we can see university students who are from Santa Marta, and it makes a difference when a country can invest uh, in the education of the youth. And then you can see in the other photo, a country that doesn't invest in education and doesn't invest in social supports. And so we can say that there are youth and an example of a community and youth in a community who can develop themselves. And but we also know that there's a structure of over 70,000 people involved in gangs. And those people have generated an operational capacity in a small country in which they control a great deal of the territory. And they have created a superstructure where they control the territory, communication. They have a hierarchy. They control the economy within the neighborhoods. You might have a small business, but you have to pay a tax to the gang, and the gang generates its income from these rents that businesses have to pay or taxes. They have their own codes and laws. They recruit young boys and girls from the neighborhoods because the government has no presence in the territory when the government abandons the territory. So those young people end up becoming future gang members. There are also many youth who have also disappeared.
Including neighbors who have mentioned certain times that they've been obligated to, for example, they have to take on certain responsibilities to collaborate with them because otherwise their family could suffer consequences. So there's many people that have been linked to the gangs, but it's because they've been obligated in those moments. And that's part of territory control the lives of people. And when you control all the normality of a city, of a particular neighborhood, you have to adhere to the laws of the gang. If, for example, in El Salvador, if you go into a neighborhood that you don't belong to, many young people are disappeared and nobody knows what happened to them, right? And so their family members look for them and they never find their bodies. Nobody knows information about them, but it's because of the simple fact that they didn't belong to that neighborhood they maybe went into, they were disappeared. And so with that, um, there's all these problems. Another part of the gangs is that they were transnationalized. They have the power to coordinate between other countries in Central America and the United States, and information flows. And that means that it's a superstructure, a transnational structure. Other governments, maybe in the last 15 years, there were governments who tried when the problem was already a radical problem. When they started, it was groups of friends, right? Groups that could fight by hand or with sticks or bats, but then they started radicalizing more. And when governments wanted to start persecuting them, they became more radicalized and they started to gain weapons, pistols, guns, then larger weapons, and they started to negotiate with them. They started to make pacts with these groups. Principally, electoral campaigns implicated that political parties had to be in agreement to make campaigns in certain territories. The gang would give permission for politicians to do campaigns, and they would influence in those elections. in that way. And so all of that dynamic of agreements generated a situation in which processes, when governments attacked, they radicalized, they gained that power where governments now have to create agreements or pacts with them. And that next step, which is what the current government is living, when an agreement is broken, the government doesn't accept the gang's conditions. So then the gang starts to show their force, their capacity to control the territory and to give that fear to the population. One day they murdered more than 80 people in 24 hours. And so that showed that in 72 hours, an entire agreement was broken between Nayib Bukele's government and the gangs. And what the government did was to react. They didn't negotiate. They eliminated constitutional rights that all Salvadorans have to be able to combat gangs. There's no process, there's no legal process, let's say, for a detention. A young person can be detained, but they may go to jail. Normally, our constitution allows so that 72 hours you have a hearing, you have a lawyer present, that you have some type of judicial defense. In this case, these constitutional rights have been eliminated. You go to jail and your first hearing comes in 15 days. And if you don't have defense, it goes to 6 months. And that process has generated a humanitarian crisis in El Salvador because in 90 days, the government eliminated these constitutional rights. And this happens when there's a war, right? That's why in this moment, by eliminating them, we have declared a war against the gangs. This happened in the 80s when we had a war between the military and the guerrilla forces. We use these types of strategies, and we can see those secret pacts have been broken. Former governments, there's many ex politicians that are now in jail because with the change of government that we have, many politicians and government workers are in jail. So this government has changed our constitution a lot, the way that he treats the constitution, but gangs also had incredible power over territory. Uh, the judges changed. Any judge that wasn't in agreement was changed. And so that means that any person that goes to jail because of the régimen de decepción, which is what it's called, that means that these people are going to go through many human rights violations without having defense. There's more than 20 people who have died in jail because there's no food. The jails, the Bartolina jail that had a capacity for 20 people has 120 people. No one can sleep, no one can rest. Many of these people are going to die in our countries. Torture in our countries is illegal, but in this moment, we are seeing torture. And so it's part of the challenges that are being created right now in this war with this government's war against gangs. And so here there's the more context. For example, in this photo, this is outside one of the largest prisons in the country, Mariona. These are thousands of people asking for information about their children who have been detained. There's no information. The majority of people, there's a sea of people on the streets next to the jails. And this is a photograph that reflects this chaos of the humanitarian crisis. The majority of women who try to get information about their husbands, they take their children, some women are pregnant. Why? Because the majority of people that have been detained, the fact that you're young, being a young person in El Salvador means that you are already thought of as being a gang member. So you may be detained just because of that. And so many families go to these places to find out what's happened to their family members. And so the trauma that more than anything, women and children are suffering is this. The government has not invested, let's say, in attention to combat the mental health that this is generating, the mental health problems that this is generating in women and children. And so that's causing part of the trauma that people are suffering, because more than anything, a man in the household is the one that takes livelihood, that wins the livelihood for the family. And so all of this is up in the air right now. In this situation, there's a lot of marginalization in the poor neighborhoods. Let's say it like this. This war is against the poor people. They are the ones that are being targeted. They are the neighborhoods that haven't had access to education, to healthcare, people that haven't received psychological attention because of the trauma from the Civil War as well. Now we're going to have a similar situation where children who are being left without their fathers, without their mothers, these are the people that are going to suffer the trauma. This government is investing in repression and in imprisoning people who they think are suspicious or who they have declared are gang members. So then the children of these people who are being imprisoned, if they don't have psychological attention, El Salvador in the next years is going to have a generation of adolescents that are even more radicalized. These are the challenges for governments like ours. If you're going to combat violence, you also have to help the population to receive the psychological treatment that is necessary. If you don't do this, the problem is being pushed to the future. That's one of the things that happened to us during the Civil War. We ended with a peace accord, but we enlarged that program into the future. We don't know what is going to happen, what the effects of the traumas are that the children of these gang members or people that are just suspected to be gang members and who are being left without their parents. The government, because they've changed the constitutional clauses, every person that is a gang member is going to go to jail for more than 20 years. And there's other charges that are for even up to 50 years. There's many people that are going to stay in jail. Right now, more than 36,000 people have been detained. And so there's stigmatization, there's huge stigmatization because the government is taking advantage to attack leaders as well. No one can protest in El Salvador. A neighbor was taken. Maybe this neighbor wasn't a gang member. The community knows him. He's not a gang member. Why did the military take them? And so right now, there's many cases in communities like the Bajo Lempa region that took leaders of the ADESCOs, the community cooperatives, leaders of unions, for example. All these people don't have the right to defense. You can't have a lawyer. You aren't allowed to have any type of legal process as is normal in the country without in the régimen de decepción. And so it's also going to serve for political objectives that the government wants to have. The government is in process of radicalizing their politics, their policies. That's going to impact changes to the Constitution. This government will probably have to change the way governmental changes are made, the way people are elected, how long a president can serve. A president can serve for 5 years in El Salvador, for example, but right now, this president is creating a situation where he may be able to be reelected. And this will generate more repression to be able to maintain himself in power. And all these politicians in the future there could be a situation where a new president is elected and all these people that have taken advantage of the situation will also end up in jail. But this parting point, this current situation will be a long process, a process of many years. And well, what does it mean to be young in El Salvador? What it means is it's complicated right now. On the one hand, we have a photograph of what we do, for example, with the young people in Santa Marta and other communities, train them in agricultural processes, in popular education programs, developing young people in their communities so that they can be active in their community, that they help the development of their community. And on the other hand, we also have a photograph that shows us the reality of a community in the city where the police doesn't know who you are. The simple fact of being a young person, of how you're wearing your hat, how you're dressed, you're a suspect. As a poet, a Salvadoran poet said, who's very famous, Roque Dalton, is that we're always the suspects. Yes, because I was watching the news and reading the newspaper that so many human rights are being violated that now you can't wear, you have long hair, you can't have a tattoo because they will consider you to be a gang member. There was someone who had long hair and somebody, an authority, a policeman came and cut their hair with a knife. And so that's a form of violating a person's human rights, attacking the way they're dressed or the way they look. The simple fact of having a tattoo, you're being considered to be a gang member already. And like you are a failed member of the community and you have to go to the jails. So the basis of the problem is the system. In 30 years, no government focused on the injustice of the neoliberal system generates the current situation. Let's say we have a almost failed state. From the moment that a gang controls the territory, it's a failed state. It's a government doesn't control the 21 kilometers squared in El Salvador, but rather the gangs control neighborhoods. That shows you that it's a failed system. The idea of how the neoliberal system was being implanted into the country, this generated a social rupture, and this now implicates the reality of our country, which has been turned into a failed state.
We try to demonstrate to the world in Santa Marta that if communities unite to resolve their social problems, if they get close to their youth, to their children, if they invest in the future of their communities, we can see changes in the system. Injustices won't be as awful as they are in other parts of El Salvador. So we've worked with many children and many youth that show that model. With so many youth from our community who have graduated from the university now are supporting different institutions, supporting departments in the government, because we invested as a community in their education. And so Santa Marta can be a small example for what could be happening in the country. And what Bukele is doing now, the worst, it's the worst of where things can get to in a failed state, where a country doesn't have a budget for education, a strong budget for health, for investigating social problems, for universities. It's a weak structure for youth. And so youth abandon education and immigration becomes the main option. And now the with the way racist things have changed the immigration dynamics, there are thousands and thousands of young people stuck on the borders. So, and now with Bukele's policy, there's going to be more immigration, more poverty. And now we've seen all these people who have entered into jails are going to lose their jobs. And so it's going to generate much more poverty. It's a politics that is born from when there's a rupture between government and gangs. And so there's no plan to deal with the traumas and the implications for the country. And it will leave many scars for us. And so specifically, this is what we do with our nursery in Santa Marta, our plant nursery. For 19 years, we've helped many young people develop skills and work on different projects. Many were able to study, and they're youth who have good positions and good jobs. They're examples, and they're people who are committed to their community. They continue supporting their community, and I think that's very important. And if a country invests in its youth, the youth won't go astray. They will help their country. And I think that's the big difference of what's been going on for many years. Many people immigrate, but many people, when they get to the United States, they don't want to hear anything more about El Salvador because of everything that they suffered in their country. So Santa Marta also has many people who have immigrated to the United States, but we have strong connections with our immigrant community. Many Santa Marta folks are in Virginia, and they're very organized there, and they continue supporting the community in Santa Marta. The government doesn't finance any of our projects, but our community members in Virginia help finance our projects. And so that immigrant dynamic has been actually very important for Santa Marta, and it has been a positive relationship. It's important because it ensures that the community can continue developing. And so our question is, what can we hope for in the future? So what can we think about this country's future? At the moment, the government has wants to show the world that it's investing in children. But really what this government is interested in is its ranking. It's ranking in the world and showing numbers. So something it did recently was legalize Bitcoin, which is a digital currency, because international banks don't want to loan to El Salvador. El Salvador had a lot of money that during the pandemic disappeared and no one knows what happened to it. It was for the first time where a Salvadoran government had a ton of access to money without any form of audit or supervision. We didn't have any records to see what it's giving away in bonuses to people in the government, what it's investing in health. And so what happened is that international banks decided that El Salvador uh, doesn't meet the qualifications to receive loans. And now we have a government that had to legalize a digital coin with the faith that that would help balance its budgets and allow it to reach economic solvency. And so we see that a lot of the money that the government had and used is money that's missing for education and health. In Santa Marta, we're faced with this big challenge of working within this system, and we have to make an effort because the next generation should be a generation that is strong, that has strong values, and that understands what Santa Marta can do and how Santa Marta can help the country. It has to be the community itself that ensures that these youth won't become future gang members, won't fall into drug addiction. And for that reason, the community has to organize itself better. The future for our country can be fatal. I'm talking about ecological consequences, trauma and suffering that the younger generations are going to suffer. All of these horrible things that are happening in the poorest neighborhoods. So in the next 5-10 years, criminality could increase if there aren't resources to invest in the youth. So what role does the international community have or can take on? As you know, Bukele controls all aspects of the country, the general attorney, the judges. This had never been seen before his presidency. He controls all branches of government and resources. So he's positioned our community and the youth as enemies, and we don't receive state funds. We receive our funds from international cooperatives, from churches, from NGOs in the United States and Europe. And so Bukele has said that those international NGOs are enemies of the state. He says that they finance terrorism and they finance the opposition. They're discussing a lay right now that would categorize all international cooperative organizations as, for example, if a US organization or community wants to support Santa Marta, uh, it will have to meet certain requirements of what it can support and what it can't support. And for example, if they gave $50,000, 40% of that fund, of that amount, would go to the government. So I think that the politics is to destroy the organizing power of the community in El Salvador. It's going to be very difficult to have a nonprofit that has the capacity to resist these policies that affect them and the community. And the democratic process that El Salvador has tried to develop, if this government radicalizes its politics against the community and organized bodies within the community, it will suppress these organizing efforts and democratic processes. There's going to be a moment when we can't continue doing this work. If the laws that are in this proposal are passed, no international organization will be able to be in El Salvador and finance political organizing and community projects within local communities. Do that work to organize and educate and prepare the youth to be leaders in the community. All of those type of organizations are going to be wiped out. And that will have very important historical implications for the future. In conclusion, I don't think El Salvador is in its best democratic moment. I say this because what our country is going through with this military law is also that the government can manipulate the news. For the government, it's very important that it's seen as the most popular government in the world. This president thinks he's the best president in the world. And maintaining that image requires millions of dollars in terms of creating a media narrative, and the government pays news stations, finances news stations to maintain that narrative. But there's a problem in the economy. these structural aspects of our capacity as a country aren't being invested in. There's no budget for that. So there was a drop in the last surveys. And then after this breakdown between the secret agreements of gangs and government, all of a sudden popularity rose again. People can be without work, without income, without food. But if you give them security, if you capture that gang member who is on the corner, if you capture the criminal who's selling drugs, and people can be on the streets more freely, that has a huge psychological impact for the population. So even though they don't have food, they feel free. And so they say, this is a good government. So it's a way of controlling the same social crisis that the poor in El Salvador face. This is very interesting because it implies that the current war against the gangs will make the country the country will get deeper into the challenges, into the holes that it's currently in. And as the banks say, we're not going to support El Salvador. There's many inconsistencies in its financial regulations and payments. So it has a higher level of inability to pay off loans than Argentina. But if you give people a sense of safety and you're flooding the streets with with the army, something which hadn't been seen since the Civil War because the Constitution didn't allow it. The Constitution says that the army exists to defend the country from international attacks. Army, but now the army has been dispatched within the country to control domestically. And so the people who have remained in the country and haven't immigrated because they haven't had the ability to, they say that this government is the best they've ever seen.
Desde muy temprana edad, en la parte de educación, tenemos un
Right
sistema
from a very young age, we have an economic system that it's terrible. And so the government needs to focus on the growth of these young people and also to invest in these programs for development and mental health so that people can have emotional stability. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Stop sharing screen. Stop share. Question here. This one. There's a question.
So entonces lea la cuestión.
Ok. Por ejemplo,
For example, how is it that trauma, or what type of trauma in particular, makes it so that young people join gangs? I say this because it's similar to what happened during the war. Well, one experience when there was military repression, many of the people who joined because their family, their mom or dad were murdered, and they joined the guerrilla so that they could survive, they could defend themselves and not be murdered by the military. In this context, in El Salvador, it's similar. The child who saw that their father was taken to jail, or because they saw that their father belonged to a gang, this child grows up with this experience and says that and think that they're going to be able to avenge the life of their parent. That has generated such profound traumas that there's children who are now the second generation of gang members in their family. What this means is that these traumas repeat themselves because no one learns from the story. We lived 12 years of war, and El Salvador should have learned from that tragic story and did not learn, or we have not treated these phenomenons. There has not been justice. All judges older than 60 years who had long cases, they were taken away from these processes. So we can't give follow-up to these processes. And so young people are going to join gangs if they don't have that treatment, if they can't get justice or gain that treatment from that trauma. So we need to invest so that that doesn't continue, so that children understand that their mother or father didn't have the best education, didn't have the best attention from the state to be a stable person, to not be a gang member, so that children understand that it's going to be very difficult. I think it's going to be very complex in the next years with what's happening now with the war, the current war. What is the public perception of Bukele? Is there a difference between poor neighborhoods and rich neighborhoods? This is very different. Rich people are in their gated neighborhoods. They live a very different reality. I think that the rich, the millionaires of El Salvador, like this government, they have the capacity to maneuver their interests, to make their interests larger. And many of them were people who financed the Arena party, but now they're happy with Bukele. For example, the owner of the Avianca airline, who is Salvadoran, they're people that are very happy. And poor neighborhoods are the ones that are suffering. The same thing happened during the war. Poor communities of San Salvador suffered the consequences of the war, but the rich didn't suffer them until the famous offensive of '89, when the war arrived to San Salvador. That's when they felt that the war was grave, and so in a certain way, gangs made it so that the rich started leaving certain urban areas in the city and moving towards the hills in certain neighborhoods that made them have distance between organized crime. And Bukele continues to defend that class and marginalizing the poorer classes of El Salvador. Muchas gracias, Peter y Betty, por presentar.
And it's actually very upsetting to hear and inspiring that Santa Marta has been able to create a space of autonomy for personal safety within that crisis. So we have a reception now for anyone who wants to come here on campus at the Revive patio, which is behind Geffen Hall at 885 Tiverton Avenue. So you're all welcome to come, and thank you very much for to our translators. We spoke very fast, and you guys must be exhausted. And thank you, Peter and Betty.
Gracias a ustedes, gracias Emiliano, gracias.
Thank you to you all. Thank you, Emiliano. Thank you, Marianela, for translating, and thank you to everyone who connected. Thank you so much to everyone who collaborated with this, and to everyone.